Hey, thanks for clicking on the level up video for the game window in Unity. Let's get back to where we were. Alright, so in the basics video, we talked about the game window, what it is and what it's used for. We also talked about how to set the aspect ratio of the game window, and we talked about setting the maximize on play button. In this video, we want to talk about some of the other features found on the toolbar of the game window. So let's start on the far left. So here we have the display options. And when I click on this, you can see that it's a drop-down menu and it just says display 1, display 2, display 3, display 4, all the way down to display 8. Now what this is used for is toggling between different cameras in your scene and having those cameras be the active camera in your game window. Let's demonstrate how this works. So let's go over to our scene view, and currently we have one camera in our scene. Now I'm going to go ahead and create a new camera. So I'm going to go to the game object drop down menu at the top and then go to camera. This creates a new camera in our scene, as we can see here. And now currently that camera is the active camera in our scene. So the reason why the new camera is the active camera in the scene is because both cameras are actually set to display 1. So if I select both cameras in the hierarchy, you can see that we have the previews here. But in the inspector, under the camera component, and we'll talk more about the camera component in a later video, but currently the last option of the camera component on both these objects is set to display 1. Now when you have two cameras set to the same display, it's the last created camera that will be the active camera. It also has to deal with the depth of the camera. So here in the camera component, we have this depth option, and right now we have a dashed line because both cameras have different depths. The first camera is set to -1 and the second camera that we just created is set to 0, and the highest number takes priority in being the active camera. But even if I were to set this one to -1, we would still be able to see that this camera is the active camera because it was created last. Now there's a number of things that we can do to change which camera is the active camera. We could either set the first camera to have a higher depth than the second camera. So I'm going to now change this one to 0, and we can now see that this camera is the active camera. But this method is changing which camera is the active camera for the current selected display. But another thing that we could do is just change the target display of one of these cameras. So I'm going to change this second camera to have a target display of display 2. Now all I have to do is change the display option of my game window. So currently it's set to display 1, which is our first camera. And if I change it to display 2, it's now our second camera. So the next feature that we want to talk about is the scale option, which is right next to the aspect ratio menu. And right here you can see that there's a slider. Now the scale changes the zoom of your game window. Now if I cursor over the scale option, you can see that a description pops up that says the size of the game view on the screen. Now this is used for zooming in on a section of your game view. But there's a downside to this, and that is as you zoom in, you can see how the picture gets more pixelated. So right now, our game window is capturing our environment at a certain resolution. And as I zoom in, I'm just zooming in that resolution. I'm not actually changing the resolution. And that's why it gets more and more pixeled. If you have ever used Photoshop and you have an image that's maybe 1,000 by 1,000 pixels and you zoom in really close, even though you might have crisp lines, if you zoom in so far, the lines start to get pixelated. This is a feature that I really don't use very often, and it can actually throw me off sometimes. If I've accidentally scrolled up using my mouse while my cursor is in my game window, it'll zoom in, and if I don't realize it, then I'll be like, why is my game so pixelated, and why am I so close? Like, the camera is set correctly, and why is it doing this? And then I'll be like, oh duh, the scaler is way up. And so you can use your mouse to zoom in and out in the game window. And then as you zoom in, you can see that there's these sliders that you can move the view of your game window. Now we already talked about maximize on play. The next option is mute audio. Now this is pretty straightforward. If you have any audio in your game and you don't want to listen to it at the moment, you can mute all the audio in your game by selecting that button. The next option is stats. Now stats shows the performance of your game. So currently all these statistics aren't changing. But if I go ahead and hit the play button, you can see that they now start changing values. So currently our graphics are running at 190, 200 frames per second. Now there's a bunch of other statistics here, like the screen resolution, which is 1920 because it goes all the way from the left to the right, and 909 because it's not quite 1080. There's a little bit up here and a little bit down here. Now the last option is the gizmo drop-down menu. Now currently, and most of the time, you don't have any gizmos active in your game view, but if you want to activate them, you first need to just click on the gizmo button, and that'll highlight the button. And you can now see that we have a gizmo here. We have the light, the directional light in our scene. And then if we click the drop-down menu option, we can select which gizmos we want to have appear in our scene. But normally, I just don't have any of the gizmos on in my game view because I always have them on in my scene view. Now that's all the additional, more advanced information that you need to know about the game window. Now I hope you were able to follow along and that everything made sense. If you have any additional questions, make sure that you leave them in the comments below. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to our channel so you can get notified when we publish new videos. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.